Israel's domestic intelligence agency, the Shin Bet, on his way to Cairo for the latest round of hostage talks. The widow of the late ISIS leader al-Baghdadi sentenced to death in Iraq for her part in the genocide of the Yazidi people. And a crackdown on terrorism in the United Arab Emirates with 43 members of the Muslim Brotherhood jailed. The head of Israel's Shin Bet intelligence agency is on his way to Cairo for the latest attempt at a hostage release deal. The Washington Post has been citing an unnamed senior American official as claiming that Hamas has signalled for the first time it's willing to accept a power other than itself ruling Gaza. Hamas, though, says it has heard no further updates and is accusing Israel of playing for time in order to scupper the deal. More in this report.
This could be the biggest breakthrough in the effort to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. Mediators have been shuttling this week between Cairo, Doha, and Jerusalem after Hamas issued an offer, reportedly dropping some of its key demands.
This report in the Washington Post is true. It is an opinion piece, but it does cite an unnamed American official. Hamas would be accepting for the first time a power other than itself in Gaza. What do you make of it?
Absolutely nothing. One, because Hamas always lies. But say, let's take it as face value and pretend that they never lie and that they are willing to take and accept a different manager for the Palestinian population within the Gaza Strip. It would be a front for their own rule.
Fights on multiple fronts. Its most important ally is increasingly embroiled in domestic politics. More and more Democrats are casting doubt on President Biden's fitness to seek re-election in November. They include the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. More in this report.
This is the most anticipated election in the world, with its outcome expected to impact major international issues such as the wars in Israel and Ukraine. However, incumbent President Joe Biden is pressed to drop out of the race as he faces mounting doubts about his re-election chances from within his own party.
Over in New York. Well, the US political timetable means there are only a few weeks left before Congress goes on recess, and with the focus increasingly on the election, one of the casualties is likely to be that much vaunted Saudi normalization deal. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Asher Fredman, Director for Israel and the Abraham Accords Peace Institute and a Senior Fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. Thank you very much for being with us, Asher. Good to see you again. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he has been back and forth a few times. He's been here in Israel. He's also been in Saudi Arabia. He's met with the Crown Prince and other senior officials there. However hard they try, it seems like it is just not going to happen under this president. Well, let's turn our attentions to the north now, because a man was critically wounded earlier today in the north of Israel after a multiple drone attack from Hezbollah in Lebanon. We can get the latest with our correspondent Zach Anders, who's up in the north of the country for us now. Zach, any updates on that person who was wounded earlier?
Yeah, we don't have a status update. The last we know is critically wounded in this drone attack that took place near Kibbutz Kabri. This is a 30-year-old man, by our understanding. He was taken to Ziv Medical Center in the Galilee. No update at this point, and that is kind of usually where things sit, especially considering some of these attacks, if they involve. We don't know if this is a civilian casualty or a IDF soldier at this point either. So usually there's about a 24-hour window before we learn any of details. Of course, the family is the first to be informed.
And of course, we had this drone attack, didn't we, Zach? Amid reports that the United States is trying to secure a deal with Hamas that would also push back Hezbollah. Do you have any idea of how that is being read, interpreted inside Lebanon today?
Yeah, it's been met with some trepidation as we're watching some of the Lebanese media channels. One of the leaders of one of the minority parties, the Lebanese Forces Party, about 19 seats in parliament, one of the Christian parties, saying, on the backs of this, we're going to have to strengthen, or actually really questioning why aren't Lebanese forces provided with the funds, the equipment to move underneath the Litani, the south of the Litani, and secure this area. But at the same time, also noting
Welcome back. Now, after a week-long pause, Yemen's Houthis appear to have resumed their attacks on shipping. A Liberian-flagged vessel came under attack today in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Houthis are hinting, meanwhile, that they may release a political leader with close ties to the country's internationally recognised government. Mohammed Katan is slated to be part of a UN-brokered prisoner swap. The UN is also calling for the release of dozens of its own workers, aid workers, who were detained by the Houthis last month. To talk more about the situation in Yemen, we're joined by Luay Ahmed. He's a columnist at Bulletin and a presenter on Builders of the Middle East. Great to have you with us, Luay. Thank you for joining us. So let's, good to see you. Let's start with this proposed UN prisoner swap then. The Houthis are kind of hinting that they may release this man, Mohammed Katan. And is this a sign that front in the war on Israel, as you were talking about earlier, the Iranian-backed multi-front war on Israel? But interestingly, Saudi Arabia, which has been increasingly directly attacked by the Houthis lately, has asked China for protection. That should be a source of concern, shouldn't it, for the region?
I think that China is coming in where there is a vacuum, given the relative weakness of the Americans, at least from the perception of the role players in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, for example, like other countries in the region. So countries are turning to different powers for support. We can take Egypt as an example as well. The economic situation in Egypt is extremely dire.
Now, a court in Iraq has handed down a death sentence for one of the widows of the late ISIS leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. It's almost 10 years since ISIS began its campaign of genocide against the Yazidi minority. The woman, who's been identified as Asma Mohammed, was convicted of complicity in the kidnapping of Yazidi women and girls, who were later sold as sex slaves to the ISIS terrorists. Well, joining us now, Entifad Kambar is the president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee, and he's a former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Good to see you, Entifad. And let's talk about this woman then. She was convicted of keeping Yazidi women in her home and generally contributing to the atrocities that was perpetrated against this very vulnerable minority. Well, meanwhile, the government in Baghdad has been working to repatriate thousands of stolen artifacts after they were smuggled out of the country during the US-led invasion back in 2003. Many of the recently recovered pieces have been put on display at an exhibition in the capital. Our Emma Siegel has the story.
Some historians call it the cradle of civilization. While marred with constant war and instability, Iraq boasts ancient archaeological sites with artifacts dating back thousands of years. But in recent decades, particularly after the 2003 U.S. invasion, many of these artifacts and key pieces of Iraqi history were looted and smuggled out of the country.
In a widespread crackdown on terrorism in the United Arab Emirates, 43 members of the Muslim Brotherhood were sentenced to lengthy jail terms. Authorities there say they were planning to carry out attacks in the kingdom. The UAE has a zero-tolerance approach to any efforts to disrupt society via violence. Let's go to Dubai. We're joined by our correspondent, Bastien Bourri. Bastien, what is the story then behind this trial?
These rare occasions actually shed some light on the presence of a political opposition in the United Arab Emirates, whatever it may be.